All right, good morning, everybody. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. They are live streaming this so folks at other libraries can watch. I don't know if anybody's out there or not, but so we're going to go ahead and get started on time. So I'm Karen Anderson. I'm with the Calvert County Master Gardener. I'm also Master Naturalist. If you want to ask me about that program, I can tell you more about that afterwards. But anyway, obviously we're going to be talking about shade gardening. And a lot of us here in Calvert County have plenty of shade in our yards. Some people are lucky and have a very nice sunny yard. So shade can be somewhat challenging, and today we're going to be talking about different native plants that work pretty well in shade, different levels of shade. So does anybody have any idea what those plants are on the front screen here? Anybody want to guess? These are both native plants. So this is dwarf larkspur is the purple plant that you're seeing up there, and then that's bloodroot, the white one. So those are both spring blooming plants that come up fairly early, but they are native to Calvert County. Pardon?
What was the white one?
The white one is called bloodroot, and the reason it's called that is if you were to dig it up and break the root, it actually red color comes out of it. So it looks like, some people thought it looked like blood. So this is just to show you how our Master Gardener group is organized. We're actually associated with the University of Maryland, the Extension Service, and so it's one of their programs that is run on the Extension Service. And locally here in Calvert County, we meet at the Community Resources Building, which is down here in Prince Frederick. It's, if anybody you know where the old library was, it's across from it's in the building that was the old library, it's across from the post office. So. And there is a brochure on training if anybody of you are interested in becoming a Master Gardener. The training starts actually this next week, so coming up. So, anybody want to tell me what they think is wrong with shade?
Nothing, I love it.
All right, you have a person who loves shade. That's great. But some people will say, well, my plants just don't bloom, or they only have a few blooms when they're in the shade. They could be tall and spindly. They sometimes fall over. And there's just a picture. This is not a native plant. This is like, but just to illustrate how plants can sometimes fall over, especially if they're not planted in the right spot. The other, sometimes people would say, well, my plants just don't grow well in shade. And there's just an illustration of a poorly growing plant. Again, this is not a native plant, but I just put it on there to show you it's just not doing very well. And many reasons for this is because you're putting the wrong plants in the wrong spot. So you may be trying to put plants that need a lot of sun in a shady location. So I will, later on in the talk, we're going to show you a lot of examples of different native plants that will do well, but actually that's what they want. They want a little somewhat shade. They don't do well in full sun. So that's the whole point of this. So what do you do with all your shade? You just grow mushrooms? I thought that was a pretty impressive mushroom there in that one. I found that picture on the internet. It's like, that's quite a mushroom, but. So my solution is, don't grow mushrooms, but enjoy your shade, and you can plant native plants that don't require full sun. So on this slide, the background of the slide is, you probably recognize it's flowering dogwood. So that's a tree that grows along the edge of the woods. So it takes a fair amount of shade. And so an illustration is just how you can relax in the shade. Get yourself a hammock and enjoy it. This map is showing you the forest cover in the state of Maryland. And the reason I put this up there is you can see in Calvert County, here we are in Prince Frederick, you can see there's still a fair amount of forest cover in the state. Now this was taken just a few years ago, but quite a long time ago we had quite a bit of forest cover. Currently we only have about 41%, but a long time ago there used to be up to 90% forest cover in the state of Maryland. So the point of this, by showing you this, is to say, having shade is kind of a normal thing for us here in the county. So there are native plants that have, grown up in these conditions and can do well in shade. So So I've already mentioned native plants. We're talking about native plants. So what is a native plant? There's various definitions out there of what a native plant is, but one that's fairly simple is just to say it's a plant that grew right here without human intervention. So it still grows here. There are other more scientifically defined definitions of a native plant, but that's really kind of the easiest way to think about it, I think. And reasons for growing native plants, you can see those are listed here. They're better adapted to our local soil and climate, so they're going to do better. They tend to be more resistant to our native pests and diseases. And so usually you can plant them and they don't have to take a lot of care like you might have to for some things that are not native here. For example, roses can take a lot of care if you're interested in roses. They can help preserve the natural balance of the ecosystem. So, you know, they evolved with the native plants and the birds and all the animals, and it's kind of a whole, you know, living ecosystem. And if you use native plants, you're contributing to that and helping to preserve that balance. If you're interested in native pollinators and wildlife, they can also provide cover and food for those animals. And again, providing balanced nutrition for wildlife. There was a study done with cardinals, our native bird, and they looked at cardinals eating berries off of Japanese honeysuckle versus cardinals eating berries off of our local, native bushes that might produce berries such as viburnums and things like that. And they compared the nutrition of those birds, and the ones that were eating the non-native honeysuckle berries had poor nutrition. The color of their feathers was duller on the males, and they just weren't doing as well. So our native berries can really produce the food that our birds need, and it provides them good nutrition. And again, if you're interested in pollinators, many of our species serve as host plants for our native butterflies and insects. So in this, the picture of this plant this is Tiarella, or foam flower. This is a native plant, and again, it does well in shade. Everything I'm going to show you does well in some level of shade, and we'll get to the definition here soon of what we mean by shade. But first, a little bit about planting a garden. A lot of these, things are things you would need to know whether you're planting a shade garden or whether you're planting in the sun. So a lot of you probably know a lot about this already, but I'm just going to go over it just as reminders for some of you folks. So when you're wanting to plant a garden, plant plants, you really need to know about the soil that you have in your yard. So is it sandy? Is it clay? Here in Calvert County, our sort of native soils tend to be acidic. So we have like soils, but you might find clay, you might find a sandy spot. And it can vary within your own property. Like I have I have a couple acres and I have a lot of woods, but within my own yard, I have spots where I have a lot of sand, and I have some other spots where there's a lot of clay. The other thing, also near your house, your soil might vary just because of when the builder put your house in there. They may have scraped all the topsoil and they brought in some fill, so who knows what kind of soil you might have right next to your house. So it might be a really good idea to have your soil tested. Now we don't have any places here in Maryland where you can get that done, but there is a website there on the slide. So it's the Extension Service at the University of Maryland, and they have a whole bunch of information about how to go about testing your soil. It's not that expensive. There's places in Pennsylvania you can send off your soil samples to and get a whole report. And if you do that, it might be a good idea to do that in several different places around your yard. Again, your soil can vary from place to place. So again, one part, our native plants tend to like more acidic soils. So if you have a spot like right next to your house, and because of your foundation of your house, it's not acidic, either want to amend the soil to create it acidic if you want to do native plants, or think about maybe planting something that's going to do well in that kind of soil. So, if anybody has questions as we go along, feel free to interrupt me and ask questions. So here, okay, what do we mean by shade? You can see there's, depending on how many hours of sun you get, So part shade doesn't mean, no sun. It means typically you're gonna get 2 to 6 hours of sun a day. Now, for some plants, you would prefer to have that in the morning because the morning sun is not gonna be as hot as in the afternoon. So you wanna, if you're thinking about, again, planting things, think about when you get that sun in your garden. Is it in the morning or is it in the afternoon? Dappled sun, that's similar to part shade. The sun makes its way through the leaves of the deciduous tree in the summer, the spring, and the fall. So there's a lot of woodland plants that prefer this kind of sunlight. They get a limited amount of direct sun exposure in this type of situation. And then there's full shade, and that's really like there's less than 2 hours of direct sunlight each day. But it could also mean that you get some filtered sunlight during the rest of the day. And there aren't any plants, like I said, we already saw the slide of the mushrooms. There's very few plants, if any, that really grow in no sun whatsoever. So hopefully every part of your yard will have some amount of sun, but do keep in mind, again, is it part shade? Is it dappled sun? Is it a little bit more toward the full shade spectrum? So think about that when you're planting a garden or thinking about what you want to plant. This is a photo in my yard. It's one of my sort of sunny spots in my yard. And I put my cactus out there for the summer. Those are my houseplants. So, again, you might think about in your yard, you might have some small spots that get more sun than others. So think about what you can do in the various locations throughout your yard. The other thing you need to know is how much moisture do your spots get. So if you have an area you want to plant under a large tree, that tree is going to compete for moisture in the soil. So you might want to plant plants that can do well in a drier soil. And I'll have some examples of those in a little bit later on. And as I noted before, again, look around your yard. You might have small, what I call microsites in your yard that are going to vary in soil moisture. So just be aware of those and think about those when you're planting plants. And then even if you've got an area that's moisture, you still want to, after you plant your plants, you still want to watch them and make sure they get enough water until they get established. So especially in dry shade, especially if you do that under a tree. So, and again, these are sort of general garden design principles that would apply in any situation, but things to keep in mind. So pay attention to how tall your plants are going to get when they're mature. So look at those labels on the plants when you get them, those little plants. Labels that tell you how tall they get, when they bloom, what color the bloom is. So obviously tall plants you want to put in the back of your bed. I think that's pretty obvious. But another idea to get some variety in your garden, use a variety of understory trees. So smaller trees, shrubs, even grasses, and then your perennials. So you want to mix it up a little bit. You don't want to have probably just a bed that's all one size plant. Mix it up, get a little variety, and makes your garden look better. Use plants with different textures, leaf colors. This is particularly important in shade, where you may not get as many. To me, in a shade garden, texture, leaf shape is really important. So think about that too, and you want to vary that throughout your garden as well. If you're interested again in pollinators, they like to have plants grouped together because a lot of the pollinators don't travel a long distance. So you want to clump your plants together, maybe 5 or so. Tend to have odd numbers of plants tends to work better in garden design. That's just kind of a general rule, but you don't have to stick to that. But they do like them clumped together better so they can go around and get the nectar from a number of plants without having to go very far. Yes, you have a question?
Do plants that grow in shade or partial shade normally reach their full mature height if they're growing in shade?
If they are, the question, just in case nobody heard it in the back, was do plants reach their full maturity, their height, if they're grown in shade? right? Is that your question? If they are adapted to shade, yes, they will.
So,
If you're growing something that doesn't really do well in shade, then it may not.
I mean, those that are noted for growing in shade or partial shade, you'd think they'd be better in partial shade. So do they grow as high if they're in shade?
Oh, in full shade versus partial shade, they may not grow as much, or as quite as tall. And they may not bloom quite as much as they do if their real niche is partial shade. So, yeah. And again, you want to use plants with different flower colors and structures, add some variety to your garden. And then you also want to think about plants that bloom throughout the season. So spring ones, summer, and into fall. And then you can extend your garden throughout most of the season. So the plants down along the bottom, just to point those out, this is flowering dogwood again. The one next to that, the yellow plant, is celandine poppy or wood poppy. That's a spring bloomer, and that does really well in shade and partial shade. It also does okay in moist style, but it can adapt to dry conditions as well, so it's pretty adaptable. It is a spreader, so if you don't want something that eventually spreads around your yard, you probably wouldn't want to plant that one. But the seed heads, when they mature, they just kind of explode and the little black seeds go everywhere. So, but I've actually had that. I have like a wall along my driveway. I've actually had it plant itself in that wall. It actually looks pretty nice, so I'm leaving them there. But again, just kind of warning about that particular one. The next one are the blossoms of eastern redbud. So that's another small understory tree, typically grows along the edge of woods. Excuse me, I thought I was going to sneeze there. So that's a nice understory tree. It doesn't get super tall, not like some of our other trees around here. The next plant over, the yellow blossoms, that's called green and gold, and that's great kind of ground cover. Another spring blooming native plant, and it does well in, I would say, more partial shade. It tends to like it a little more moist, but it can adapt to some drier conditions. I actually have that growing under a dogwood tree, and then I also have it out in my, what I put in quotes, my lawn. I don't really have grass growing, but I'm just kind of letting it go. And so I have it planted on actually like a little bit of a sloping area on my yard, and it's helping to hold the soil, and it's nice ground cover. And the final blossom down there, the purple looking one, that is actually a close-up of Virginia bluebells. And that's another spring blooming flower. And the bees love that stuff. So if you're into pollinators, they really like that too. And I've actually had that spread in my yard on its own. There are some plants that ants actually help spread around. They actually get the seeds and they spread them around. So I'm suspecting that might be one of the plants that is that. I've heard that about violets, but not sure about that one, but it's kind of an interesting relationship. Okay, so we're going to go into some examples now of different plants for different conditions for shade and partial shade. And here I'm showing you what we call spring ephemerals or woodland perennials. These plants come up early in the season before the trees get their leaves on, and they tend to have a very short life cycle in terms of being when they're above ground and when they bloom. So they come up early, they'll put out their leaves, they'll bloom, and a lot of times in the summertime when it gets hot, they'll just kind of disappear, so you won't know that they're there anymore. This depends on the conditions of that particular summer. I think this past summer I had my bluebell leaves last a long time, but that'll vary. So anyway, these are great to plant if you want that lot of nice spring early color. But some of the examples are, this is Solomon seal, the one that the tall stalk with the flowers along there. There's the trillium is down here in the lower corner, and this next to that is a native bleeding heart. The center is the genus for that. And then there's Virginia bluebells again. It's a little bit bigger picture showing you some of the leaves. Above the Virginia bluebells, is just a jack in the pulpit that's just kind of coming out. So that's before it's developed the jack in the pulpit flower. Those leaves are coming out there. And then up there above that, to the left of the jack in the pulpit, is another picture of foam flower. Now, foam flower will stay around pretty much throughout the spring and into the summer. Some of these other ones tend to die back, like I said. Anyway, they have a short cycle, so they can take advantage of that sun before the trees have leafed out. They can bloom, go through their whole cycle. So now I already mentioned that leaf color and texture is important when you're thinking about shade garden. And there's lots of ferns and sedges that can provide the different leaf shapes, different textures. They aren't going to bloom for you. Their blooms are maybe a little more conspicuous. Like the ferns, these are the fertile fronds of the royal fern that's here in the background. And this picture up here, that's actually a native Pachysandra. So you probably are familiar with the Asian Pachysandra. This is another blooms early in the spring, those little white blossoms, and makes a pretty good ground cover. This one up on the top is a little inset, that's a cinnamon fern. And again, we're talking about different colors. You can see the color of the leaves. If you compare that to the royal fern, it's got more of a yellow green to it, and then the fertile fronds make a really nice display when those come up later on in the year. And that gets that can get up to, I would say, a couple feet tall for the cinnamon fern. The royal fern can get fairly large, but it gets larger more in width than in height. So again, some variation. And these are the sort of the fiddleheads of ostrich fern that's here, and that's a really tall fern that can get to, I would say, 3 feet or more, depending on conditions. And something about ferns is everybody thinks ferns, they need a lot of moisture, but not necessarily. Some of them prefer more moisture than others, but there are some that do well in dry. A little bit later on, I'll show you one of the ferns that does pretty well under trees and in a dry soil situation. This is one of our sedges. This is called blue satin sedge. And it's really nice blue-green color to it, makes a very nice ground cover. I had one of these just kind of volunteer in my yard. I don't know where it came from, but it just popped up in my yard. And I love the color. I mean, it really is a nice, bright, sort of bluish green color. So again, we're talking about different colors and different textures. You know, it's got the different shapes to the leaves. You can see it's kind of a broader leaf for one of the sedges. Compared to this sedge over here, you can see this one's much more grass-like. This is Pennsylvania sedge. This one does very well in shade, in the dry shade. And I've actually used it, again, on some slopey areas to help hold the soil, where I didn't really want any tall plants, but a low ground cover, again, helps hold the soil. So it almost looks like, grass, but you don't really have to cut it. So it's a low maintenance grass. And here's the fern that does well in drier soil. This is bracken fern. Now, some people think it can kind of go crazy on you, but I have it in my yard and it really hasn't spread, but some people have noted that in some cases you can get it go crazy and spread all over the place. So depending on where you put it, that can happen. So that's just kind of a warning if you don't want something spreading around your yard. But if you do, that might be a good choice. Yes.
Speaking of spreading, are there good ways to propagate those sedges that you find volunteer? Can you just divide them?
You could probably, if you get a nice clump, you could probably divide it like you would a clump of grass. So make sure when you do that, you have roots for each part that you divide. But you're gonna have to wait a while before they get big enough, I think, for you to divide them.
You need to divide them in the fall and then wait for them to come back in spring.
I would say fall is a good time to divide them, but I would, you're divide them and plant them right away.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you want to water them in and make sure to get them situated. But fall's a good time to do that kind of thing typically, because then they get time to put their roots down before the winter, and then they should be ready for spring. So, yeah. Any other questions right now? Okay. And then this plant that just popped up here up in on the right-hand side of the slide, that is a close-up of ginger, our native ginger. It's a very nice ground cover, and it seems to do well. A little bit moisture soil, but not necessarily. And that's a picture of its flower. Its flower is pretty small, so people don't grow that for the flower per se, but more as a nice ground cover. And again, they have a different shape of a leaf and a different sort of texture to it. Yes?
Is that an edible ginger or an ornamental?
It's an ornamental ginger. It's not, yeah, I don't know anybody that uses that along with a root like we do. You find in the grocery store the ginger root, so I've never heard of that. Yes?
Is there a version with a white flower?
For the ginger, not the native. If you see a white one, that could be, there are several non-native gingers that are on the market. And there is another native ginger that's further south. I've seen it in North Carolina that has a different leaf shape, but I think it has the same color flower. So I haven't, unless you're thinking of maybe a trillium potentially. No?
The one I have here in my yard has the leaves, white, and it's star-shaped flower. Really
Interesting. Yeah, I don't, unless there's some abnormality or something, which, occasionally can happen in nature sometimes. We get albino animals, there could be something that went wrong with the plant and it all of a sudden has a white flower, but not normally, these are not normally white. Yes?
What color are they, the native ones?
The native ones is kind of a pinkish red color. Maybe it's hard to see on the slide because it is kind of small, but yeah, it's a red tubular flower. Okay, and then here's another picture of green and gold again in the center. And again, that's a nice, very nice ground cover, nice yellow blossoms. So now we're going into more examples for you. So looking at heart shade and the driver soil. So these are some examples of shrubs that you could use for your yard. So up here we have New Jersey tea. Pollinators love that stuff. So if you're into pollinators, you can try that. That's a spring bloomer. And there's serviceberry or shadbush, which is up in the right-hand corner. Now the shadbush gets its common name from, if you've been here long enough and you know about the shad, the fish shad, and it's running. When it comes up the streams to do its thing in the spring, that's when the shadbush blooms. So they named it after the shadfish. Kind of interesting side note for that. Another very nice shrub, and you might see it in our woods a lot, is the spice bush, northern spice bush. So this is a shot of it in the fall. Nice yellow color, fall color. And in the center here is a close-up of its flowers. So this is early spring. The flowers aren't that big, but if you, say, walk out in the woods, and I've seen this property for American chestnut land trust on their property out in the woods, early spring, and you kind of see this yellow haze out in the woods. Well, that's the spice bush that's all blooming, and it kind of gives you that yellow haze out there. And then right above the photo of the blossom is the photo of it in sort of late, almost into fall there, but those are the red berries that it gets. Animals love to eat those berries. And over to the right is nine bark. Now this particular one is a variety of nine bark that was developed for that particular color on the leaves. But you can see it blooms more late spring into summer with those white blossoms. This shrub doesn't get super big, it's maybe a couple of feet off the ground. Spice bush can get kind of spreading and it can get up to, say 5 feet tall, but it's an open, airy shrub. So it's a nice one for the background. Just a note about varieties. with native plants, you can find varieties out there at the nursery or local nurseries. I would stay away from varieties where they bred it to have like a double blossom. So you might see some fancy varieties of different plants. The reason I say that is if you're interested in helping our native pollinators, pollinators cannot get into those double blossoms very well and get the nectar, and therefore they won't perform their pollinating services very well. So if you have a choice, I would go for, the kind of more the simple blossom for the native plant. Some varieties are just fine because, like in this case with the 9-bark, they were choosing a leaf color, which doesn't really affect the pollination. Now, some people are purists about their native plants, and they'll tell you never buy variety. Always buy the straight species, and always buy it locally grown. Well, that's pretty hard to do around here because there's not many nurseries that grow sort of plants that are from local seed sources. So ideally, you would like to do that, but again, it's probably not practical to do that. But again, the only thing I would stay away from is those double blossoms on some of your native plants that they do try to select for. Because I think people like to see those big blossoms, but the insects don't like them so well. So switching now to perennials that can do well in shade, part shade rather, and then the drier soil. So up here in the top corner we have wild bergamot or bee balm. This is in the mid family. Butterflies, bees, they love it. Even hummingbirds like this. This because come in a couple different color varieties, which is fine. But in the mid family, it is a spreader. It spreads by roots and rhizomes. So again, if you want something very neat and tidy, you might not want to plant this one, but it is a really pretty plant. Down below that is butterfly milkweed, or butterfly weed, you might see it called. Nice bloom in the summertime, these orange blossoms. Again, I would not put this one in shade. It needs some sun to do well, so part shade only on this one. And it does well in dry soil. And this is the host plant for the monarch butterflies. I don't know if you're familiar with the problems monarch butterflies are having. This is the larvae. This only eats milkweed, so it's a specialist. So if you want to help monarch butterflies, you want to plant milkweed in your yard, and this is one of the native milkweeds. The other one that's native here is swamp milkweed. Tends to like a more moisture soil, as implied by the name, but a lot of our plants can adapt. So you might want to try a milkweed in your yard. Up in the middle is a columbine, and this is a spring bloomer. Fairly early in the spring, and the leaves will die back in the summertime. Sometimes it'll come back, in the early fall, but again, mostly a spring bloomer. Hummingbirds do like this one, so if you want to attract hummingbirds to your yard, you might want to plant a lot of this, because they tend to like those tubular flowers. They tend to be attracted to red flowers, but they will use other plants as well. And the white blooming plant down here is smooth white beard tongue, and this is a nice plant for under your trees. I have a lot of it under my dogwood trees and the edge of the woods. It does really well. Again, it'll do well in a dry soil. It's another spring bloomer for you. And I have seen hummingbirds use this as well, although not as much as the columbine. So, and the other one over there, the yellow one, lance leaf coreopsis. This is a late summer, more into fall bloomer. So a lot of the yellow flowers these types of ones seem to bloom more in the fall. But yes.
Question on that butterfly weed, do they self-seed?
They can self-seed, and but they're a little bit hard to grow from seed. So there's another milkweed that's around here, common milkweed, which gets really tall, and I've seen that self-seed a lot easier than the butterfly milkweed. And then the common milkweed spreads around a lot, so another caution on that. Yes?
Does the coreopsis spread as well?
It can spread some. I wouldn't say a lot, but it can spread eventually. It's more of a clump forming plant, so if it's gonna spread, it might by itself seeding it, but not by runners, like the mints, the Leonardo. Okay, now for shade, places where you don't have as much sun, these are just a few examples of things you might think about. Maybe some things you wouldn't normally think about, but this is coralberry over here on the left side, so a close-up on the flowers. Again, spring, it does develop little berries in the fall, and this one can spread, it can create a colony by spreading its roots out. And I have it in my yard, and that's what's happening with it, so another kind of a warning, I guess, if you don't want something that's gonna spread all over the place. Something that you might not normally think about planting is sumac. There's a couple sumacs that can do better in a little bit of shade. A lot of times you'll see those out in full sun, but so we've got smooth sumac over here, and these are great wildlife foods. So if you're thinking about planting something for wildlife, you might think about this. This would be a good one for, kind of the back of your bed, because this one does get tall, so you don't want to plant it in the front. But here's another example of a variety of a native plant. So this is fragrant sumac. It's called Rolo, and you can guess why it's called that, because here's a picture of it in the fall, so it gets nice fall color, but it doesn't get very tall, maybe a foot, 1.5 feet tall, so kind of a nice edger. Yes? Attract deer? Deer will eat most anything, so.
There are some.
Yes, I mean, there's some plants that deer don't like if they, like leaf texture, and then like some of the plants that have like a sap they won't eat. Fuzzy stems, yeah, they don't like that texture on their tongue. But I'm not gonna say they would never eat it, because.
But if you grow some of these in the background, then
I wouldn't say it's necessarily gonna attract deer, no. I mean, when I say wildlife, I think thinking of smaller birds primarily. I mean, you could get small mammals climbing up the stalks, but not thinking about deer for sumac in particular. But more of your birds and stuff will eat that. Could be like later in the year too. Yes, another question.
how long did you say the smooth?
How tall does it get? It can get 5-6 feet tall. So it's a tall one, yeah. Any other questions? Did you have a question about a plant? I don't know. Do you like those? I didn't tell your mom to plant them. Yes.
Smooth. What is that flower?
It flowers later, I would say in the summer, and then that picture is probably going to be like really early fall. So it doesn't really develop its seed head, so to speak, until later in the year. And some birds kind of leave that a little bit later in the winter. They may not go for that first off, but later in the winter when other things are already gone that they can eat. Did I get another question over here?
Well, isn't that the one that dries and you can use it in flower arrangements?
You can use it in flower arrangement, yeah, dries up. Yes, I've seen people do that. There's other things that look similar to that. Yeah, there's like I don't want to say the bird said, but there's another like almost grassy kind of looking thing that grows out in fields that maybe sometimes is used. But I have seen that used very occasionally. But I have a question in the back first, and then we'll be. I think you're thinking of poison sumac, which is totally different. Yeah. No, that's not this. Yes.
Would you maybe want to eat some coralberry?
I don't know about eating the coralberry. I have not heard of whether you could eat that or not. I've never heard of people doing it, but that doesn't mean somebody hasn't. So I can't tell you for sure. So I probably wouldn't unless you did some more research on that. So, okay, after that. let's go on.
And the
Yes,
next, the picture below the, is that the picture below the smooth in there?
that is the grow low.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the one in the fall, and this is a close-up of the leaves in the summertime. Okay, so now perennials for shade, and on the drier side, again, this is another picture of, the background is excuse me, Tiarella, one of those Tiarellas, so forgetting what I am. This picture here, this is a fall bloomer, this is whitewood aster. So again, does well in dry soil, does well under trees. Just a note about planting plants under trees, you want to be careful about digging around under trees because you don't want to cut a lot of the roots from the trees. So if you do plant under trees, it's better to get much, the smaller plants. So if you go to plant stands or whatever, and they have the little plants, 4-inch pots. I wouldn't plant anything larger than that if you're doing planting under trees. Again, because when you get in there and you start digging around, you're going to be cutting, roots of the trees above, and might do some damage that you didn't really want to do. So here's this is a late spring into summer bloomer, woodland phlox. Some people consider this a little bit more of a ground cover, but when it blooms, so it sits up probably about a foot with the blossoms, but the leaves don't get that tall, maybe 6 inches or so tall. So nice, I would consider it a ground cover, I guess. It's a nice one for the spring. And here's another picture of columbine again. You saw that it's popped up a couple of times. So columbine is one of those ones that's a little more adaptable. So I think this is just my theory because of my experience in my yard. I've planted columbine in a number of places and it does well for a year and then it kind of peters out. And other people have had a lot of success with it. But it does self-seed, and I've had it self-seed in some rocky pathways. And it seems to do well, perhaps in maybe soil that's not quite as acidic. And this is, again, just kind of my theory, just from my observations in my yard. So, yeah, so that one's, it's a very pretty plant, though.
I'm sorry, did we say combine is better acidic soil?
I think less acidic.
Yes.
That's just, again, it's a native plant. That's just from my experience, my personal experience with my yard. Other people have had great success with columbine. They love it, and it can seed all over. When the seed heads mature, you can shake out the seeds and have it go all over the place and reseed. But no, native plants. That's the great thing about using native plants; they don't need fertilizer, so they're adapted to the your local conditions. So you should not need to fertilize them. Yes, I would. If you're going to plant columbine, I would try a few of them, test it out, see how well it does. See, like I said, in my yard, they do great for 1 year, and then the next year they don't really come back so well. So again, I don't. This is sort of my theory from my experience in my yard, which you can try different things. And if it looks like it might not use as much acidic soil, you could adjust the soil right around that plant if you really want to have columbine. That's another question?
If you don't fertilize, is compost a good idea?
Yes, compost is a great idea for flower beds. I mean, no matter what you're growing, compost is great. You're obviously in shade, so you're going to have lots of leaves. So a great thing to do is if you take your leaves and you have a leaf shredder or whatever, shred them up and spread them around, compost them for a year, spread them around. That's great for your flower bed. So I would, you don't have to go out and buy fertilizer. You can use the leaves that you have in your own yard. Okay, going back to shrubs. Now here we're going to more of a moisture condition and part shade. And up here with the tiger swallowtail on it is common buttonbush. And pollinators do love it, so you can see why the butterfly is on there. Another spring bloomer. And again, these plants tend to like a moisture soil. So down here we have wax myrtle, and these are the berries that it gets toward fall, and they're kind of a waxy thing, and actually the colonists used to take this and melt it down and use it to make candles. So you don't have to do that anymore, but I suppose you could. Another name for this one is southern bayberry. There's also a northern bayberry, which is very similar, but tends to be further north of Pennsylvania. Down here is the flame azalea. Well, isn't that a great looking? There's a very brilliant looking plant, and this is another spring bloomer like most azaleas. And again, you really need acidic soil for the azaleas. They really like acidic soil. And this particular azalea, the flowers come out first, really before the leaves come out. So flower first, and then it'll leaf out a little later on. And then up in the right-hand corner of the slide is our native hydrangea. Some people might not realize we actually have a native, it's called smooth or wild hydrangea. It looks more like a lace cap hydrangea, so it's not like the typical big mop head hydrangeas, which are non-native. And again, acidic soil for that one too. And again, these are all shrubs, so they're gonna vary in height, but probably 4 or 5 feet in general for these guys. Yes.
Can any of those shrubs be potted instead of in the ground?
I think if you have a big enough pot, you could do that. Yeah, I've seen azaleas done that way. Probably not the bayberry as much, but I mean, if you get a big enough pot, you could do that. You might want to. The only thing in the wintertime is protecting it, because it's going to be a little bit more exposed. So if we get really cold temperatures, you might need to protect it so the roots don't freeze. So going to perennials, again, we're still with the part shade and the moist. Up here is blue star or Andersonia. There's a couple different varieties or species of that, but tends to have a really light blue flower. And again, this one blooms spring into summer, and the one I have at home can get quite tall, so it's several feet tall. There's one of the other species doesn't get quite as tall as this, and down here below the blue star is a smooth aster, so a fall bloomer, doesn't get super tall. Some people might even kind of consider it a ground cover. I don't think I necessarily consider it a ground cover, but it doesn't get really tall. So next to that, the white flower, this is white turtlehead. You may also see pink turtlehead that's available in the nurseries. The white turtlehead is a host plant for our Baltimore checker spot butterfly, which is kind of one of our rarer butterflies for here in the state of Maryland. I will tell you though, if you plant white turtlehead and hopes you're going to get the checker spot, you probably aren't. Checker spots don't travel very far at all, so you might actually have to try to acquire larvae and actually bring them to your yard if you want the checker spot. So, and then above the turtlehead is cardinal flower. This is a summer bloomer, really brilliant red color. Hummingbirds really like this one as well, the red color. They're attracted to it. This one can be a little picky in terms of having it come back year after year. It can seed in, but one thing that we've noticed with it, several of our master gardeners here, is this is something that you don't want to mulch. So it has a basal set of leaves, and then the flower stalk comes up. But in the wintertime, the rest of the year, you don't want to cover up that basal set of leaves. So you don't want to mulch around this plant. And we have another one of our master gardeners in our group that has a great spot, and he's like, this thing just seeds in and it does really great. So sounds like he has an ideal setup for a cardinal flower, but it is a really pretty flower. And next to it is the great blue lobelia. So they're actually, these two are in the same genus. They're both lobelias, but quite a bit different. again, I've seen hummingbirds use the blue lobelia, so tubular flower, and like I said before, they aren't necessarily always going to red flowers, like some other plant. Again, this is a blooms summer, mostly the summertime, maybe a little bit into the fall. And I would say that with the flower stalk, it can get a couple feet tall. So, and then down below the lobelia, the blue lobelia, is a common name, bungbane. There's other names for this, but and this is just showing you the flower stalk. So, and this can get quite tall, probably about 5 to 6 feet tall with that flower stalk. The leaves themselves are not nearly that tall. They're maybe a couple feet off the ground at the most, but the flower stalk comes up. Pollinators seem to be attracted to it. This is kind of a great specimen plant. It's really stunning when it blooms. So it's a very nice addition, might be a very nice addition to your garden. And I've actually had this one spread, like, I think by seed. So it's popping up, it's spreading itself around where I planted it originally.
This is before you take blood.
Pardon?
When,
Oh, it blooms late summer, actually into fall. Did you have this? Okay. Okay, now going to shrubs for shade. And a couple things that you might not see too frequently, especially the American bladdernut. This is kind of pretty interesting. The seed pod is pretty interesting. So, and then white blossoms in the spring. But I haven't seen this one available in a lot of the nurseries, but I think this would be a pretty interesting plant to have in your yard just because of the blossoms, and then that seed pod would be pretty attractive, I think, in the fall. So, and pollinators would also like this as well. Below the bladdernut is one of our native viburnums. It's called southern arrowwood, and you can see it here. This is in late summer, getting into fall, and it has its berries. All of our native viburnums are going to be blooming in the spring, and they're going to be blooming the white blossoms. So, but a lot of them do produce berries, which a lot of our birds love to have. So if you want to plant something for wildlife, one of the viburnums would be really good to plant. And the southern arrow would be a nice specimen to have if you have a place that's a little bit more moist. And over here is alternate leaf dogwood. So you're thinking dogwood, and you're thinking maybe the big tree, but there's also some dogwoods that are in a shrub form. So different species from the tree, the flowering dogwood, but nice shrub. You know, maybe it's 4 feet or so high. You know, it can be trimmed back. This is a blooming against a spring bloomer, and then it'll produce the seeds in the fall, which the birds would love to eat. And above that is early azalea. So you can see it's got a white bloom with kind of a pinkish center. So this is one of our native azaleas. Again, you need acidic soil for those azaleas. They really like that. It's not quite as adaptable maybe as some of the other shrubs in terms of what soil they're in. Now for perennials, for a more shady location and with some moisture soil. So again, you see cardinal flower here. So cardinal flower is a little fairly adaptable, I would say. So, but it still likes the moist soil. But it can still grow in a little bit more shade. I think it probably, in general, though, you would get more blossoms in a parched shade situation versus shade, but you could still grow it in shade. And this is false Solomon seal. So it has the blossoms on the tip of the branch. Earlier on, I showed you a picture when we had the woodland spring ephemeral slide up. There was a picture of just regular Solomon seal. So two different plants, both called Solomon seal. But again, the false Solomon seal has the blossom at the end of the branches instead of along the flower stalk. And again, a spring bloomer. And then above that is Jacob's ladder. And this is another, I would say, late spring bloomer. And it gets fairly low. It's only probably about a foot off the ground. So it's a pretty nice compact plant. So it would be probably pretty nice along the edge of a flower bed. So those are the examples I have, and these are just some resources for you, where you can look up information about native plants. For example, the Maryland Native Plant Society website, they have a number of resources on their website. They actually list plant sales, so you get a lot of questions, well, where can I get native plants? And I think, you can go to your local nurseries around here and ask for them, but they don't always necessarily have them. But the more you ask for them, the more they're going to stock them, because they're going to stock, of course, what people buying or think they want to buy. But there's a lot of plant sales. And in fact, our Master Gardener group, we have a plant sale every year. Ours is going to be first Saturday in May. I think it's the 3rd. And it's always held at the Community Resources Building off the parking lot. Starts at 8 o'clock in the morning. We have people lining up before the opening time, waiting to get those plants, but we do feature a lot of native plants there. So that's one place that you can get some of these plants. There's a couple other nurseries, other plant sales that are held around the area, especially in the spring. If you want to travel farther away, there's Adkins Arboretum, which is over on the Eastern Shore. And if you become a member, you can go there, and they have a native plant nursery there. They have a sale twice a year, spring and fall. As a member, you can do a pre-sale online, and they feature a lot of native plants. They have a fair number of shrubs at that sale too, so that's something to think about. I mean, if you want, it's like an hour and a half away, but it's only once or twice a year, so think about that. Again, go to that Native Plant Society website, and again, they'll list places where there's a lot of native plant sales. I think that's one of your probably better resources in terms of getting a lot of native plants at one location. And there's the Bayscapes. I don't know if anybody, y'all have seen this brochure, this booklet, Native Plants for Wildlife Habitat Conservation Landscape, so Chesapeake Bay Watershed. This is a great resource. It's hard to get this booklet down because it went out of print. I think that you may be able to buy it online. I'm not positive, but they have this whole thing posted online, so you can always go online and look at it, and you can look up plants. But this is a great resource, and I have the web link for that here on this slide. An interesting website is this Maryland Biodiversity Project. Now this covers more than just plants, but it's everything that's native to Maryland. And if you find something in your yard and you don't know what it is, you can take a picture of it and you can submit it to this website, and they will help you identify it. So even if you find an insect, a plant, whatever you find in your yard, that's a pretty neat resource to go to. So. Anything else I want to mention? So if you're into pollinators, the Eco-Regional Planting Guide for pollinators, that's for the outer coastal plain, which is what we're in. That has a list of different plants. Now, of course, that list is going to have plants for sun too, so not just shade, but it's another great resource. So.
The very bottom
Mm-hmm.
is not in the printout yet.
Oh, the
The biodiversity.
Biodiversity Project? Did it get cut off? Okay, well then I'm gonna leave it up there if you guys want to. You can if you just go Maryland Biodiversity. If you look that up on the web, you should get to that site. Yes?
When you plant some natives, do you generally have to weed, or do they usually outcompete in the weeds?
I would say you may have to weed for your first year or two until they get large enough, depending on how big of a plant you're planting. So I think weeding, yeah. But I mean, as they get larger, they're gonna, more outcompete the weeds. So, but I mean, that's sort of, to me, the same principle as whether you're planting in shade versus planting in sun versus planting non-natives versus natives. So. And some of your plants can be a little more aggressive, so they're gonna outdo your weeds anyway, but it just depends on which ones that you plant. Yes?
How negative is
Some plants, non-native ones, as long as they're not considered invasive, then I think it's fine. I mean, I'm not, in my yard, I'm not a purist. I have some things that are non-native. Still, these are not invasive. But there's a lot of non-native plants that can be very aggressive and spread and become invasive, and they just take over and, you know, outcompete the native plants. So that's the problem with some of the non-native. Excuse me? Creepers are not invasive, no. And actually, there's some native ones too, so, yes. Yeah. Any other questions? All right, so I say go out there and enjoy your shade, you know, plant some native plants, enjoy your shade. My yard, I always get pink flamingos coming out in the summer, I don't know about you guys. So that's just for fun, I just add those for a little bit of, you know, a little pop of color here and there, and, you know, have fun in your garden, is what I say. And this is actually a picture of the other milkweed, the common milkweed. You can see a zebra swallowtail on that, so they really attract a lot of pollinators. Now, common milkweed likes more sun and it can spread around, but if you have a sunny spot and you don't care if it spreads, that's a great plant for pollinators. And so finally, we do have, our Master Gardener group does have a Facebook page, and we've got a lot of information on that. And we have one of our Master Gardeners back there that actually helps take care of that page and posts things. So we thank her for that. So if you're into Facebook, check us out. I think some of the presentations are posted there and a lot of information. And again, remember our plant sale that we have coming up, May 3rd.
May 7th,
It's the 7th?
yes.
I always get the wrong date. It's a Saturday. It's in there. It's in the brochure. If you picked up the brochure for all our upcoming events, lectures, series, it's in there, and the plant sales listed in there. And then as a final thing, okay, so people, if you didn't hear that, the Maryland Biodiversity Project has a Facebook page as well. But that's a pretty great site. We, at one of our Master Gardener meetings, one of the guys that has really put that site together and the whole project together gave us a talk about that. It's pretty interesting. So, talking about the plant sale, we have a few coupons to give away. I think we have 3, and these are good for using at our plant sale. So if you think you might come, we have a drawing for that right now.
Okay. And so we have 3 coupons
Okay.
and a bag full of different things. Okay, so, and on the corner of your presentation, there's a number. So number 6. So does anybody have number 6? Okay.
Right here.
Okay, so come on over and do you want the bag or do you want a coupon?
Were there 2 number 6s?
No.
Well, there should be like a 9 or a so those are
I
six.
thought somebody over here said we had 6 too. I'm sorry.
Okay, so here, so come over here. Do you want the bag or do you want the coupon?
I guess. It's going for the seed. All right. Let's see what else we get. Oops. We have a number 3. A coupon for plant